Howdy, welcome to another episode from the Foundry where I give monkey brain advice to DMs and players alike, along with tips and how-to guides using my campaign as an example. Today, I'll be finishing up the series on how to create a legendary monster using villain actions, or sometimes called action-oriented monsters. However, if you'd like to see the mechanical approach, feel free to check out part 1. I'll leave a link to that in the description down below. Action-oriented monsters, from what I've been able to find, it was coined and created by Matt Colville. This philosophy addresses the same issues as a mechanical approach, but with a little less focus on rules and mechanics. It instead chooses to focus more on the theme or the feeling of the battle itself. It helps make up for the fact that most boss monsters don't have the action economy necessary to really pose a threat to a fully equipped party, let alone non-legendary monsters that are used as boss fights. The overall process of making these monsters is as follows. First, we need to improve the survivability of the creature, either by increasing their hit points or their AC. Second, we need to improve their action economy, their mobility, and then make villain actions. There is an additional optional step, which is giving your creature either legendary actions and or legendary resistances. Now, I won't bore you with over-explaining how to increase the monster's survivability in this video. So if you'd like a better breakdown on the math and reasoning behind that, feel free to check out the first part, which will be linked in the description down below or in the card in the corner. But I will note that if you plan to use minions in this encounter, don't increase the HP or the AC by too much, as compared to if it was a solo monster fight. But without further ado, let's jump into the next step: action economy, mobility, and villain actions. Unlike the mechanical approach to creating legendary monsters, action-oriented monsters really feel dynamic and more unique. To do that, our action-oriented monsters are more focused on what our creature should be able to do, based on either the monster art, lore, or even how we describe the creature to the party as a whole. From there, we will tweak and develop the action economy. I'll provide one in-depth example later on in this video with a few quick examples after that. But for now, I'll just focus on the general idea here. For actions, we really need to think about and look at what our creature is supposed to be to help determine what additional actions or abilities it might have available to it. For example, if our creature has a lot of eyes on its head, maybe it should be immune to flanking or have additional senses to go along with its normal ones. However, if the art or your description includes additional claws, pincers, tentacles, or other appendages, but there are no actions that utilize these things, we need to create some ASAP. And not every attack needs to have an additional condition that it does, but if it makes sense for your creature or for this creature in particular, then go ahead and add that. As for bonus actions, it doesn't really change much in compared to the mechanical approach, because our goal is really to pour salt into the wounds of our party members, comboing off the conditions set up by our actions. Reactions are already pretty rare for most creatures, but with action-oriented monsters, that is no longer going to be the case. This is helpful so we don't overburden ourselves to try to think of every single action we could possibly give this creature. Instead, we can save some of these for reactions. The goal for creating reactions is to have at least 2. That way, our creature can do something every single turn with its reaction. And don't overcomplicate these. These should be fairly simple and straightforward. Just think about them as if-then statements. If condition or situation A happens, then reaction B will happen. Easy. When it comes to our creature's mobility, this is pretty straightforward. If you think adding additional movement to this creature will make the encounter more dynamic, then go ahead and add that. Matt Colville talks about an ankeg in his video describing this approach, and he increases the 10-foot burrow speed to 20 feet. The reason being is it helps make the encounter way more dynamic, because now when the ankeg decides to burrow underground, the party has to make a conscious decision whether they want to engage him and go underground with little hope of being able to get out in the same turn, or wait on the surface waiting for it to come back up. However, if you're a little concerned about tweaking the movement directly, you can make an action that utilizes the movement in a specific way, kind of like a predetermined disengage action. Villain actions can feel daunting to create at first, but don't worry, I'll break them down in a way that makes sense and should be easy to replicate for any creature you want. First, let's define what villain actions are. These actions work similar to legendary actions in that they happen at the end of another player's turn. However, you only get one of these per round. And if your encounters tend to run longer than 3 rounds, like 5 for example, consider having your villain actions occur on rounds 1, 3, and 5 instead. Now, it's these actions that really define this encounter and help make it feel so dynamic, so memorable, and so thematic. Here's a simple framework to work with when you're making villain actions. The first villain action for action-oriented monsters should be initial mobility or utility. This helps give your action-oriented monster a strong advantage or help them position themselves to really utilize their abilities properly in the upcoming rounds. While for round 2, your villain action should give your action-oriented monster escape mobility. This allows them to reposition or escape from being ganged up on by your party and help them better focus on the real threat. And then we have the last one, round 3's villain action. This is the explode phase. This is the damage phase for your monster. Here's where he unleashes the thing that made him terrifying and worthy for everyone to remember. If you're ever unsure though on what to do for the explode phase, feel free to look at legendary actions and take inspiration from them, and just reflavor them a little bit to better suit your creature. Moving on to the options step for action-oriented monsters, this is where we determine if our monster really needs a little bit more power, giving them legendary actions and or legendary resistances. To help us determine this, we should look at the following 3 factors. What level is our party? What magic items does our party have available to them? What type of encounter is this? If this is just a random encounter or some type of field boss, then legendary actions aren't really necessary. However, if this is your big villain or the final monster at the end of the long quest your party has been building up to for many sessions, then maybe you should add legendary actions. But remember, our villain actions and our new action economy should already be making up for this lack of power. Adding legendary actions will really sway the advantage in your favor. So kind of take this with a grain of salt and be ready to tweak this as necessary. However, if you want to add legendary resistances, you can be a little bit more liberal with this. Reason being, legendary resistances only really prevent cheeky tactics from happening and turning good fights into gimmick fights. Plus, we don't fully want to shut down the party's creativity. We want to encourage them to come up with cool, fun tactics, but maybe try new ones sometimes if they just keep going back to the same old one. So for this, we can give our creature anywhere from 1 to 3 legendary resistances. Let's jump into our first example using villain actions. And to do that, we're going to use a simple goblin, but we're going to change this one a little bit and make him an ice goblin. Reason being, this goblin's going to be a normal goblin that's just used in the Arctic environment. He's going to use the same basic stat block to begin with as a normal goblin, only difference being on looks that he has now blue skin and white hair. This encounter is built for a party of 4 to 5 adventurers with an average level of 2 to 3. I'm imagining this encounter being a small band of about 5 goblins, with one of them being the leader, and he's who we're really going to focus on in this example. Now, first things first, increasing the survivability of our creature via hit points or AC. Every goblin in this goblin band is going to have either cold resistance or cold immunity. Our leader will have immunity while the rest have resistance. This shouldn't be a big deal as cold damage at these low levels isn't really prevalent, but it will help beef them up just a little bit. The leader of this band will have his hit points bumped up to 15, but we won't touch his AC at all because he has so many friends with him. And obviously, the reason why we bumped his HP to up to 15 points is so he can survive more than 1 attack. This way, he can now survive about 3 to 4 attacks on average. Now we can move on to step 2 of improving the action economy, the mobility, and villain actions for our leader. Starting with his actions, we will add in a couple additional actions to his stat block. First, we're going to add a simple Ice Claw ability, where he can make a melee attack with his Ice Claws, dealing some additional cold damage, either an additional 1d4 or a static 2. I'll even go so far as to add this cold damage to any melee attack our leader and his band does. Additionally, I'm going to be adding a cold breath attack weapon that they can all do. It's going to have a fairly low dex save and do very low damage, but the main reason we want to add this is so we can cover the environment in ice and create difficult terrain that we can build off of later. For bonus actions, we'll just add an additional attack action it can do against a prone target and call it Pounce the Fallen. This will allow the goblin to move up to half its movement speed and make 1 Ice Claw attack against the prone foe. And this movement won't provoke attacks of opportunity. This bonus action should help instill the feeling that I want to project on my party that these goblins are opportunistic savages. Before we jump into reactions, I want to add an additional fun ability that they can do. When they die, I want them to explode into to ice shards. To go along with this new ability, one of the first reactions I'm going to add is when he's attacked by an attack of opportunity, he can retaliate with an ice claw attack. While his second reaction is going to be when targeted by a ranged weapon attack that he can see, he can utilize and harness some of the cold nature inside of him and alter the airflow around him and give himself an additional +2 to his AC against that ranged attack. As for mobility, I don't think I'm going to directly increase or decrease any of his movement speed. However, what I will do is give him and to the rest of his band the ice walk ability. This allows them to walk on ice without having to make any ability checks and ignore ice and snow difficult terrain. This should combo well with their breath attack and their additional bonus action. Finally, we come to the villain actions, and we're going to keep the framework I talked about in mind. Our first villain action will have the leader shout out, "Set the field!" where he will command the rest of his band to set themselves up and get into position. All of the goblins will be able to move their full movement speed without provoking any attacks of opportunity. This way, they can better align themselves to either catch as many party members in their breath weapon or really set the field and cover as much of it in ice as possible. While our second villain action, I'll call Prepare the Table. This is when the leader will shout out to the rest of the band to shove a nearby target, hopefully knocking them prone. However, if some of the goblins are not in range of a party member, they can move up to half their movement speed to get close to one, but they won't be able to shove. As for our last villain action, I'll go ahead and call this Time to Eat. Our leader will shout out to any remaining goblins in his band to make 2 claw attacks if they are within range of any enemies. As for the optional step of adding legendary actions or resistances, for how low level this encounter is meant for, I don't think that's necessary. So here are some additional quick examples that you can use to have a better idea of how to utilize villain actions for different creatures. Our first one's going to be a gorilla and zombie. He can have a villain action or additional actions that allow him to climb up a nearby wall or tree or anything kind of tall and body slam down onto one of the party members. Or if 3 of his 4 claw attacks hit the same target, then as an additional effect, it can grapple the target. Another fun example would be a vicious bear that could do a mighty roar and paralyze any enemies within a certain range of him. Or if he's been fighting for too long, he can go into a blood frenzy and just start mauling away, doing an automatic critical attack on whoever it is that he hits. A couple other examples would be something like a spirit, a ghost, or even a specter that could form some type of fog cloud or bring a party member into the ethereal plane. And with that, that brings us to the end of this video using Matt Colville's villain actions and our series on how to create legendary monsters. If you found this video helpful and enjoyable, give this video a like and comment down below which you think is the better way to create legendary monsters, the mechanical approach or the thematic approach. And if you're curious about the 2 most recent source books, Spelljammer and Journeys to the Radiant Citadel, I'll be releasing my reviews on them from a monkey brain perspective soon, so make sure you get subscribed so you don't miss when that comes out. In the meantime, if you want some pre-balanced and thematic encounters to use at your table, check out my encounter series. Or if you're looking for other general tips and advice for DMing, check out my DM tips and advice playlist, where I cover other aspects of Dungeons and Dragons. But yeah, see you guys next time.